The drought of 2012 in the western part of Zimbabwe was a particularly bad one. By May, all of the natural waterholes within the Hwange National Park had dried up. Wildlife became totally dependent on artificial water points that had to be pumped 24 hours a day in order to keep up with the insatiable demand. The scarcity of water was not the only problem. Elephant, along with most other game species, had to stay close to the water. Browse soon became a problem. Elephants started to die, not so much as from thirst, but from starvation. For the scavengers, it was a time of plenty. Across the park boundary, the local human populations weren't faring much better. Crop failure and livestock fatalities were taking their toll. When Ted Davidson, the park's first warden, arrived in Hwange in 1922, he realized that the provision of water was the key factor in the park's development. The region is semi-arid, with an average annual rainfall of around 25 inches, most of which falls between the months of November and March. By July each year, in all but exceptionally wet seasons, most of the natural waterholes dry up. Water-dependent game animals were forced to leave the park, and conflict was inevitable with a rapidly increasing human population bordering the park. Most of Hwange National Park is flat and sandy, with little runoff during the rains. Consequently, there are no perennial rivers and very few small watercourses. There are, however, numerous natural pans formed over thousands of years by animal activity. These pans are seasonal, only filling with the arrival of the rains. The game park sits above a network of fossil riverbeds containing vast amounts of water, and so a program to sink boreholes near established pans and pump water into them was started. As wildlife populations increased, elephant in particular, so too did the demand for water. The windmill system was unable to cope. During the 1950s and 60s, diesel engines replaced the windmills, and the efficiency of the water supply system improved considerably. As water points multiplied and the park opened up, there was an animal population explosion, with elephant leading the way. With this increase, the damage to the habitat became all too evident. The authorities were faced with two alternatives: either to cull back the elephant numbers or to let nature take its course. The widely quoted theory used to oppose culling is known as the stable limit cycle hypothesis. This hypothesis can be viewed as a cyclical relationship in which elephant numbers increase while thinning out the forest, and then decline when trees become sparse. With the elephant's decline, the trees regenerate, and the cycle is repeated once more. There is a time lag whereby elephants do not respond quickly to environmental change. Hence, the trend of elephants and the trend of trees are similar to sine waves, the peak of trees being slightly ahead of that of elephant. Kenya is often portrayed as the darling of African wildlife conservation because of its protectionist standpoint. Kenya's Tsavo National Park is one of Africa's largest, extending over 5,300 square miles. In the late 1960s, the park was faced with a serious overpopulation of elephant, similar to the one that presently faces Hwange National Park. The Kenyan authorities decided to follow the stable limit cycle hypothesis and not intervene. In this decision, however, major factors that had created the problem were overlooked and false assumptions were made. Firstly, animal populations were confined within artificial man-made boundaries. It was not a natural situation. Secondly, early elephant counts in the 1960s were grossly inaccurate, representing less than 1/10 of the actual numbers. The last absurd assumption was that dead bodies return much-needed elements to the soil. In 1971, a severe drought hit the region, and as many as 15,000 elephant and hundreds of black rhino in and around the park died of starvation. People from the neighboring villages, who were also suffering from the effects of the drought, swarmed into the park to gather up the ivory that littered the landscape. Once all of the ivory was picked up, poaching was the natural progression. This spawned a pandemic that swept across the sub-region. By the 1980s, the elephant population in Tsavo had been reduced to 6,000 from an estimated 36,000. The irresponsible decision to allow Tsavo to self-destruct resulted in the desertification of thousands of square miles of conifera canopy woodland. The Tsavo-type solution was unacceptable to the Zimbabwean authorities.
We started to be worried about the impact of elephants on habitats. We noticed more and more trees being knocked over. We noticed the transition from beautiful woodland like we're in here to grassland. The impact of elephants was considerable.
Not only would the environment be totally destroyed, but it would also result in a waste of meat in a protein-deficient country, a loss in potential revenue from skins and ivory, and there was also the ethics involved in allowing animals to die of starvation. It was also considered that as the Hwange National Park was created through the artificial provision of water, it was not a natural environment and it had to be managed.
So we started trying to limit the number of elephants on the land, which, to put it quite crudely, we literally had to cull elephants just to preserve their habitats and the habitats of other species.
In terms of the Zimbabwean Parks and Wildlife Act, the National Parks and Wildlife Management Authority has a responsibility to protect all ecosystems and their components, and not individual species. Consequently, a program to reduce elephant numbers was initiated. For culling to be effective, more animals must be removed than are recruited into the population each year. It only takes around 15 years for an elephant population to double in size, so there is little risk in overculling. Hardwood woodlands, on the other hand, take 10 times as long to recover from elephant damage, and only then where the effects are reversible. So even if a mistake was made in calculating the offtake, it would only take 5 to 7 years to have a substantial increase in the elephant population, whereas it would take over 100 years for the hardwoods to increase. Caution was exercised with the culling program in Hwange. From 1960 until 1970, only a couple of hundred elephant were eliminated each year. In 1971 and 1972, 2,000 elephant were removed. Soon after this, the program was stalled due to the country's liberation war. No major culls were carried out until 1980. In 1983, the goal was to reduce the population from 23,000 to 12,000, the level at which serious habitat damage in the park first caused concern. This figure was calculated taking into account vegetation composition, food availability, and climate. It was acknowledged that even 12,000 elephant was too many, as the state of the vegetation in the 1960s had not been closely monitored, and there had probably been considerable habitat modification before it was recognized as such. Furthermore, when the population reached 12,000, it was already increasing exponentially, so that the damage then reported had actually been caused by fewer animals. The ideal situation would have been to reduce numbers to below the ecological carrying capacity and then allow them to build back up. This was, however, logistically impossible with the limited resources available. In 1980, there was a huge backlog of culling throughout Zimbabwe and a lack of the essential equipment with which to do it. With serious overpopulations in a dozen different areas, and knowing that as elephant numbers increase and resources decline, the rate of destruction accelerates, the authorities could only do the best that they could. The Hwange operation was staged over 3 years, as it was impractical to cull and recover products from 11,000 elephant in a single dry season. Continued population growth during this period meant that some 13,000 animals had to be removed. The exercise was completed in 1987, but was hardly over before there was a major influx of elephant into the park from the seriously overpopulated Chobe National Park and adjacent areas in Botswana. The 1987 post-cull census in Hwange was back to over 17,000 head, and included recently tagged animals that had traveled over 100 miles from the west of the Chobe National Park. Since 1987, there have been no substantial elephant culls in Hwanghae National Park for a variety of reasons.
The costs of killing elephant in a culling program are high. It's not just the cost of the bullet. It's the cost of all the people that have to recover those carcasses, get full value back from those carcasses. The ivory trade paid for our management. In 1989, the world decided to put the elephant onto Appendix 1 of CITES. Suddenly, we had no income, and we didn't do the management that should have been done. People were conscious of it, and the elephant population has increased dramatically. We've just had a survey of elephants that suggests that there are not fewer than about 80,000 elephants in Zimbabwe.
The international ban on the sale of ivory has made culling prohibitively expensive. The cost of mounting a culling operation of 1,000 elephants is in the region of $300,000. Whilst some money can be recovered through the local sale of ivory, meat and skin, the only way to recuperate the expense of a culling operation is either through the international sale of ivory or with foreign funding. 2 one-off sales of raw ivory have taken place since the elephant was listed on CITES Appendix 1 in 1989. The first was in 1999, when Botswana, Namibia and Zimbabwe sold ivory to a single buyer, Japan. And the second took place in 2008, when Botswana, South Africa, Namibia and Zimbabwe sold to China and Japan.
The problem with a one-off sale is you don't know when the next batch is going to come onto the market, so there's a lot of uncertainty in the market. Also, the way the ivory one-off sales were set up by CITES were disastrous.
Everything is wrong with these sales. The illegal trader has no incentive to operate sustainably. When you can only obtain a supply of the product once every 9 years, you're going to look for something else in between. Secondly, the value of the ivory coming back to the producer countries, because only a few, under CITES, only a few buyers, 2 buyers, are allowed to attend the auctions are a farce. The 2 buyers can set the price for the ivory amongst themselves. And in particular, where China is not looking for the biggest ivory, it's looking for large quantities. Japan, on the other hand, is looking for high quality, very big ivory. It's very easy to separate the business between you.
The buying agencies then, because they didn't know when the next one-off sale was going to happen, they actually sat on the product, drip-fed it to the market at vastly inflated prices. They made all the profits. Those profits aren't going back into conservation, they're going into the pockets of consumer country intermediaries. And then the high-priced product at the other end sends out the signal to the marketplace that this is a valuable, scarce good, and then it encourages more people to come in and compete illegally again.
Examination of the returns from the sales indicates that the range states lost between 65 to 75% of the value expected under normal trading conditions. Nevertheless, the CITES Standing Committee verified that the proceeds of the sale were used for elephant conservation and community development. The present decision-making mechanisms of CITES do not readily lend themselves to providing incentives to conserve elephant.
CITES is clearly a treaty that aims to regulate international trade in wildlife. But from regulation, now we have a trend in the recent years that is going into prohibition. And this is not really helping some African countries which are very much devoting their efforts into proper management of elephants. The recent trends in the international arena has been mainly based on law enforcement and demand reduction of ivory worldwide. But so at a certain point, the convention has lost part of its mandate, which was a proper regulation through sustainable utilization. The word utilization has, unfortunately, almost disappeared.
When Ted Davidson established the park in 1922, There were between 500 and 1,000 elephant in Hwange. Today, the population has exploded to around 40,000 or 7.1 animals per square mile, unevenly distributed across an area covering 5,600 square miles. If the aim of a national park is to sustain woodlands and areas of old growth in order to maintain the levels of biodiversity associated with it, then woodlands which receive less than around 30 inches of rainfall per year will likely decline or be lost at elephant densities even as low as 1.3 elephant per square mile. If the Zimbabwean wildlife authorities had sufficient money, acted in defiance of world opinion, and started culling back the elephant population in Hwange, the end result would be much the same as in the 1983 culling operation. Botswana, notably the Chobe Game Reserve, is still critically overpopulated with elephant, and Hwange would once again be swamped. Without a simultaneous, coordinated culling operation between the two countries with the full backing of the international community, the total destruction of this fragile habitat will be complete. By supplying year-round water to the Hwange National Park, a water-dependent artificial environment has been created. An unnaturally high population of elephant triggered by this provision is destroying a delicate ecosystem. Turning off the water supply will not solve the problem, as there would be a mass, uncontrolled die-off of most of the wildlife species, including elephant. If water continues to be pumped and nature left to itself, a disaster on a scale surpassing that of Tsavo National Park will result. Control and management of elephant numbers, not only in the Hwange National Park but also in neighboring Botswana, is the only solution. The elephant poaching scourge that is affecting parts of Africa and the overpopulation problem that face Zimbabwe and Botswana can be directly linked to the ban in the international trade in ivory. Africa has been denied the use of an important tool in its wildlife conservation toolbox.
I started my career as an extension officer working on private land in Zimbabwe. When I first started working, everybody was farming cattle. The reason people were doing that is that wildlife had no value. So we changed the legislation. We gave the ownership of wildlife to the farmers, and we also encouraged them to use it through meat production, safari hunting, products, and so on. And within 10 years, the vast majority of cattle ranchers, people who said they were culturally cattle ranchers, had switched to wildlife. And they were making 2 to 4 times as much profit from the land, and also allowing the biodiversity to recover. Better water, better soil, better trees, better grass, and so on. We realized that if white farmers could do it, what's the difference? Why can't black farmers do it? So we invented Campfire.
Campfire is the acronym for Communal Areas Management Program for Indigenous Resources, and is a strategy devised to satisfy the needs of rural communities whilst conserving the environment. The policy gives these societies the right to decide how and whether they want to conserve wildlife and habitats, and the ability to benefit from them if they do.
This is a program that has been in operation since the late 1980s and covers roughly 50,000 square kilometers, which is the same size as the area that is under the state in terms of the parks and wildlife management. In terms of numbers, we have communities that receive benefits directly or indirectly, directly from the Campfire program, and these constitute about 25% of the population, around 800,000 communities.
Safari hunting is the best wildlife use option in communal areas. Game populations are generally too low to support photographic safari operations, but high enough to sustain controlled hunting. The bulk of the safari hunting opportunities in communal lands is for dangerous game, the majority of which are considered problem animals, that is, crop raiders such as elephant and livestock-killing predators.
When I started in Campfire, something like 300 or 400 elephants were being killed a year in communities for eating crops. Because, you know, living in a community, elephants are terrifying and they do a lot of damage. So in 1989, we introduced safari hunting to these areas. And we allowed the communities to set their own quotas. And as a consequence of that, roughly a reduction in the number of elephants killed every year from something like 400 to something like 120. So instead of using a lot of animals very badly, but by doing sustainable use properly, we use much fewer animals, much better. And so we create sustainable development. And by sustainable development, I mean you produce more from less. You produce a lot of money from very few animals.
Around 90% of campfire revenue comes from hunting, with elephant contributing more than 70% of annual revenue. Trophy hunting benefits these communities living on the edge in numerous ways. The primary benefit is from the revenue raised through trophy fees, which averages around $15,000 per elephant. Of this total, 85% goes straight into ward and village level projects. The local economy is stimulated by the activities of the safari hunting operations in the form of employment, the purchasing of thatching grass, sand and stone for the building of camps, and the hiring of part-time labor for road clearing and maintenance work. The hunting clients also support the local curios industry. The amount of philanthropic dollars from visiting American sport hunters is significant. A good example of this is a project that was initiated by a sport hunter that saw the financing and implementation of the sinking and fitting of 42 village wells in the communal areas adjacent to the Hwange National Park. The cost of each well was in excess of $10,000. A further benefit of trophy hunting is the actual control of the problem animals, with the meat being distributed to impoverished communities that subsist on a protein-deficient diet. The local communities and not the central government control the revenue earned through sport hunting. The people decide on how the money is to be used, whether it is in the form of cash dividends, infrastructure development such as wells, grinding mills, schools and clinics, or compensation payment for damage by wildlife to crops and livestock.
The relationship that Campfire has had with the international communities was one that has been very sound. Formative years of the Campfire program received a lot of support from the international community, particularly from the United States of America through its development arm, USAID. Through that support, Campfire has been able to set up systems of community involvement in terms of organizing them into accountable institutions that preside over the funds that they receive from hunting.
The implementation of the Campfire project across 12 districts in Zimbabwe was a formidable task. The Bulelima district is situated on the southwestern boundary of the Hwange National Park. Within this district, there are 13 wards that benefit from Campfire projects. Introducing Campfire into this area was particularly difficult. The district's community is made up of different economic and tribal subgroups that have competing natural resource use interests. The nomadic hunter-gatherer San people were the original seasonal inhabitants of the area. During the 1930s, the Kalanga and later the Ndebele people moved into the area as a result of the implementation of the Colonial Land Apportionment Act. The Kalanga and Ndebele people are farmers and pastoralists. Lagisa is a form of transhumance practiced by the people in the communal areas of Matabeleland, involving the seasonal movement of cattle from one area to another to extend the grazing range. Herdsmen move into the Lagisa and live under temporary shelters, which they abandon at the end of the season. No individual owns any part of the Lagisa area. It belongs to the community as a whole. The Lagisa area in Bulelima is situated in the northwest, bordering Hwange National Park. Within the Lagisa, the Matengwe Dam was built in the mid-1960s as part of an irrigation project. At the time, it was the world's longest earth wall dam, 7 miles in length. During the Liberation War, the irrigation scheme was abandoned, and with the lack of maintenance, the dam wall fell into disrepair. In the 1980s, after the end of the war, the district council sought to rehabilitate the dam wall during a time that the Campfire program was being discussed. The idea was to re-establish the Lagisa system and at the same time open up sport hunting in the area. The dam wall was rebuilt with funds donated by US aid. Soon after the inception of the campfire project, opposition emerged from the cattle owners. They felt that their right to use the area for grazing was being compromised and that the proceeds from campfire would not bring in as much to the community as cattle sales. The results of an in-depth scientific study showed that not everyone in the community owns cattle. 90% are owned by only 50% of the households. The campfire program offered the opportunity for everyone to benefit from a communal natural resource. Today, the cattle owners are allowed to graze their livestock in the Lagisa area from the 1st of July until the 30th of November. Revenue from elephant sport hunting is distributed evenly across the wards, and various social projects have been initiated.
I want to narrate my story about the construction of our clinic project. This was a community initiative project. We have got 6 villages. Each village had about 250 homes, and you can multiply that number by 5 and you can get more than 7,000 something people. The nearest clinic to us is about 25 kilometers from here. And the problem, we've got the river between us and Dolwane. During the rain season, when the river is in flood, we cannot cross. So it's a very big challenge. All the contributions came from campfire.
Both cattle grazing and sport hunting are reliant on the Matengwe Dam. Without water, neither cattle nor wildlife can exist here.
If we don't have the dam, then there's no project. That's the only source of water for 140,800 hectares. So what this means, it's a critical dam, which needs to be maintained. 2009 with the dam breach, 2010 a major one which costed the council and the safari operator 44,000 US. 2013 we have had 3 major breaches which are yet to be done. And on estimate, each breach, if it's a major, usually takes about 30,000 US. Council does not have much money to fix the dam wall its own. Only the money from sport hunting, that's the money which is used to fix this dam wall.
Campfire last received external funding towards its operations in 2003. And when that support ended by US aid, there hasn't been any significant investment by external development partners. And to see campfire surviving to this day means there's something right that it has been doing to the livelihoods of communities.
Every major Zimbabwean national park has at least one boundary with a communal land. Communities in these regions have set aside areas along these boundaries for wildlife. This affords the wildlife an extended habitat, and furthermore, a buffer zone is created between the people and the national parks.
Local people can disrupt any project in their view if it's not a good one. As soon as we devolved power to local people and they honestly felt that the resources, I won't use the word belonged to them, but they were in charge of the resources. They had the authority. It made such a huge difference. Now they had the incentives to get on and manage it well.
By realizing the process which we get from wildlife, we are taking this serious and sensitive. Animals are ours. We need to protect this animal, and we are doing it. So we have got village monitors here who see that we are controlling the poaching in the area.
The advent of campfire has made wildlife valuable to the community, and pressure on the individual not to poach has increased significantly. Human encroachment on protected wilderness areas is held in check.
Even in crowded Zimbabwe, you'll see that wildlife stopped declining and in some places started to recover. And you can see that idea spread across Southern Africa and in fact globally.
And the best example of that is probably from Namibia, where there are some 79 communal conservancies. And those communal conservancies in Namibia cover 19% of the land surface of the country. And the primary form of land use there is consumptive use of wildlife. Now take that away and close that down. Much of that land would revert to cattle or subsistence agriculture.
The sustainable use is building these massive buffer zones around protected areas. without which I don't think protected areas are going to survive without a lot of state subsidization in the region.
We must put this in perspective to look at how things are working in Africa. Every single national park and game reserve today, without exception, is underfunded. Just look at Kruger National Park, perhaps one of the best known national parks in Africa. 1 million visitors a year. And yet Kruger, with all its money and its resources, still has to bring in the army to help with the protection of rhinos. Now, what does that say? That the way we're running things in Africa, with the money that we have that's generated from conservation, it's simply not doing the job that we want to get things right.
If we look globally, the biggest threat to wildlife is the expansion of domestic stock. 4% of the global zoo mass is now wildlife. So that means 96% is in domestic species. So why have domestic species increased? Domestic species have increased because they're owned by people and people are allowed to use them. What we've shown in Southern Africa is that when you can own wildlife and you can use it, it can come back. And so to me, the recovery of wildlife from 4% up to 30 or 40% depends on us giving the ownership back to the people who live with it. Our biggest threat is international governance to this, because in countries like Southern Africa, we have shown categorically that sustainable use policies, not just random arbitrary management, but proper policies that give the ownership to wildlife and encourage markets, provided the money goes back to the landholder, are extremely successful. The biggest threat to wildlife is certainly not poaching, although poaching is visible. The biggest threat is replacement by other forms of land use. And therefore, the more valuable wildlife is, the more wildlife is going to spread across the landscape. And so international governance that is starting to chip away at the value of wildlife is actually a very serious threat to the future of wildlife in Africa.
On the 4th of April 2014, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service announced a suspension on the importation of sport-hunted African elephant trophies taken in Tanzania and Zimbabwe. The decision was taken without any prior warning. Neither country was consulted beforehand, nor was the sport-hunting community. This was despite recommendations in a memo to the director of the service from the Chief Division of Scientific Authority that early engagement with the sport hunting community was needed to maintain positive relations and create opportunities for cooperative action to affect change.
It has come as a shock to the Campfire program that we wake up in early April to hear that a decision has been made, which decision has far-reaching consequences on the sustainability of the Campfire program, particularly when it comes to elephant management.
It came as a bombshell. And now you're not meant to do that under the treaty. If you're planning to drop a ban on some country, you talk with them first. The US didn't do that.
If US Fish and Wildlife had come to Zimbabwe national parks, come to the Zimbabwe safari industry and explained what their concerns were and said that, given us a time frame on which to sort it out, I think we could have had much greater results and developed a much greater sort of engaged relationship, which as opposed to this polarized kind of relationship that's developed now.
The reasons given for the suspension included questionable management practices, a lack of effective law enforcement, and weak governance. In the case of Zimbabwe, the service, by their own admission, used limited, unsubstantiated data as indicating a significant decline in the elephant population.
Although the US Fish and Wildlife Service is supposed to have adequate technical evidence for what they've done, they did it on absolutely skimpy evidence. Because Zimbabwe hadn't surveyed its elephants for some time, they made the assumption that the elephants were in decline. We've just done a national air survey of elephants, and we found that there's been no change in the numbers of elephants, that in statistical terms there's not a significant decrease in the population at all. This country can carry perhaps 50,000 elephants sustainably without huge damage to habitats, without the loss of other species. If you're overstocked by 50,000 elephants, how do you define a decline? Maybe, we need to get rid of 50,000 elephants. Mother Nature will do it for us, but not in in a benign way. I've seen landscapes of elephant populations that have eaten themselves out of house and home, and it's a sickening sight.
There wasn't any form of consultation, prior warning as to what exactly was going to happen. If it was a question of information of any reporting requirements that had not been met, then I believe the first step would have been to communicate that and provide a time frame in which there should have been appropriate responses, and failing which there would have then been the need to take punitive action.
I understand that the statistics as they stand now in early December are that less than 70 or about 70 of the elephants, of the 180 elephant that are on the campfire quota throughout the country have been taken this year. And probably a lot of those are on deals where operators have had to resell to try and recoup some money. And so way below what they'd normally be selling for.
If we're looking at this year's trophy bull elephants that were on quota, out of about 189, about 108 trophy bull elephants had been booked by American clients.
The knock-on effect for that to the communities has been huge, in that we just haven't been able to pay them the amount of money that they used to. Mahenya community gets from us $80,000 in guaranteed income, plus another $8,000 in community support. And then if we shoot any trophies on top of the elephant, then we pay them for those as well. So just that Mahenya community alone can expect to get about $100,000 from us. And so far this year, we've been able to pay them about $20,000. We can probably say that there's a 75% reduction in the income to communities this year from this ban on the elephant from Zimbabwe, which is going to have a massive impact and probably going to change a few attitudes towards elephant conservation at the community level here in Zimbabwe.
This is going to have far-reaching repercussions as far as the development of these committees are concerned. This was the golden goose that was giving us a revenue that was readily available. We did not have a lot of bureaucratic structures if you had to access it. When I look at this ban, I find myself coming out with three things that are going to happen. The first thing is that the community, the local, the indigenous people will no longer value these animals because they don't benefit and they will not benefit from them. It was easier in the past to convince them there was something tangible that you could show them. Then the second thing is that they are going to poach them because this time they will not be benefiting officially. They will still want to benefit from the animals. But now that there is nothing which is legal that they are going to benefit from, they will start poaching them. The third thing that I'm seeing is that the projects that have been assisted by CAMFAR are going to collapse because there is no sustainability.
Our aim was that we were supposed to complete this project early in 2015. People are demotivated, that they think that we cannot complete this project alone without any assistance from anywhere because they were looking forward for this assistance from the elephant proceeds. Now, we don't know whether we're going to do it or not because of this ban.
We are again preparing for our next cropping season. And it is during cropping and ripening of crops that human and elephant conflict is most intense. For now, it might appear as if nothing has happened when it comes to people's attitudes towards elephant.
Before the ban to us, we were trying to settle with them because we realized their benefits. There were not much problems to us, but there will be now a problem for us because they are destroying our field. We can't get anything out of it. Is where we can turn the word now from staying with this animal to be problem animals because of this situation.
The bottom line is that the people need to get value out of the species to justify their existence, their coexistence. I mean, the people are living on the boundaries of national parks. They're the ones who are allowing the elephant populations to expand. And if we don't maintain a value to the people from this resource, then the people are not going to accept that resource, and we're going to see the elephant range diminish. So I think that's a key aspect that we have to think of going forwards, and it's been seen throughout the country with this elephant ban.
Communities will find other things to do with their time, with their land, and the quickest decision that communities will make when they realize that there is no benefit accruing from the elephant will be to turn that land into something else. And that something else will be agriculture, and it won't be viable agriculture. We are talking about very marginal areas that on average receive about 500 millimeters of rainfall per annum. And therefore you can't do any meaningful agriculture, even on a subsistence basis.
In semi-arid savannas, you can make more money out of managing land for wildlife, and if you've got elephants as part of that equation, you can make a lot of money, than you can through any form of agriculture or traditional land use. And the problem is that if governments interfere in the authority given to local people to do that, the local person just simply says, I'm not going to have my livelihood hanging off frivolous decisions by government. It's better for me to go to that lower valued land use where I will not be messed around.
So we are going to lose habitat for elephant. We are going to see a lot of human encroachment into these areas. And at the end of the day, if the objective was to conserve elephant, then ultimately we are in fact going to lose more elephant.
The Legisa system in the Bulelima district at present allows for both cattle grazing and trophy elephant hunting. If the utilization of elephant is removed as an option, cattle numbers will increase as people who presently do not own cattle will look to do so. A farcical situation will result if the sport hunting of elephant is closed. A starving elephant population on one side of the fence, and on the other some of the poorest communities in the world being denied revenue and protein from the utilization of a natural resource because of a perceived but erroneous concern for the well-being of a single animal species that is actually in a state of overpopulation. The ban of the importation of sport-hunted ivory by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is ill-conceived, as the numbers of elephant taken as hunting trophies has no effect whatsoever on the overall numbers in the population.
What the Americans are effectively saying to the country, Zimbabwe, is we're taking away your sport hunting income, you can't trade in ivory, now pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. Conservation is about money. If you haven't got the budgets to run your parks, something is going to go badly wrong. If you're thinking of taking any conservation measures to enhance the status of African elephants, make darn sure that you don't disrupt the continuous flow of income into those countries that is supporting that wildlife. Wildlife management is a delicate balancing operation between costs and income, and you now interfere with the income side, all we're left with is costs.
The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has stated that it has donated $1.2 million for elephant and rhino conservation in Zimbabwe between 2002 and 2014. Between 1994 and 2012, Campfire generated $39 million, of which $21.5 million was allocated to communities and used for resource management, household benefits, and community projects. The service has also stated that wildlife trafficking is one of the most profitable types of transnational crimes, with annual revenues estimated to be as much as $10 billion, a statement that proves that trade bans do not work. Money that should be going back to those countries burdened with protecting these wildlife species is instead going into the pockets of the criminals.
What people seem to be missing is, and I've done a lot of work recently for CITES on the effect of trade bans. It was in the terms of reference, and I looked at prohibition in the United States, which was a complete failure. And I looked at the illegal drugs trade, the illicit drugs trade around the world. Billions have been spent trying to stamp it out, and their clear message comes out, and that is that if there's a genuine demand for a product and you put a ban on it, it will find its way to that market one way or another. And it actually spawns the whole network of illegal trafficking. And there were several lessons that always the traffickers are smarter than the people that are trying to catch them.
Of great concern is the fact that removing the U.S. trophy hunting market is an open invitation to illegal hunters to take over the hunting and export the ivory through the illegal trade. those local communities that have been deriving an honest living from trophy hunting will become the next generation of illegal wildlife traffickers, joining the $10 billion a year industry.
And you can see if you've made a major investment in something and now suddenly through a stroke of the pen, like on a stock market, it's gone, you're going to do second best. And second best is, all right, we'll get the money from the ivory out of these animals and we'll deal with the local middlemen and traffickers that are buying ivory. What I've found in working with rural Africans, even higher than their own daily needs of food and that sort of thing, is the education of their children. They will spend a fortune to give their children adequate education. The temptation to go into illegal trading in ivory is enormous. You know, one tusk or one rhino horn is enough to solve this problem of the child's education. In contrast to most other countries, you know, we have a significant number of rural people whose primary income is coming from wildlife, which is they legitimately and legally managing.
The United States Endangered Species Act is a one-dimensional, archaic piece of legislation that does not take into account the economics of wildlife conservation or the welfare of the people who live with and benefit from the wildlife resource. Instead, it focuses on the well-being of individual glamour species without consideration of the ecosystems within which they live. On learning that the elephant population in the Gonarezu National Park in Zimbabwe had increased to around 10,000, the service remarked, "The increase in elephant population in Gonarezu National Park is excellent news." This statement is another reflection of their lack of understanding of the broader conservation issues involved. The park actually has a serious elephant overpopulation problem, similar to that of the Hwange National Park. The elephant carrying capacity of the Gonarezu is probably around 2,000. The ecosystem of the park is being trashed. Practical, common-sense wildlife management is being sacrificed on the altar of pure science. Formulas and rulebooks in the hands of faceless foreign bureaucrats are holding Africa's wildlife to ransom. Eco-imperialism of the highest order.
Some of the things that the US Fish and Wildlife Service are insisting upon, they want to know how much money are you making. It's intrusive. It goes beyond it. All they need to know is that there are X number of American hunters coming out each year, and they know roughly what they're paying on safaris and that sort of thing. And you can reasonably assume that that money that's going in the form of hunting is going back in one way or another into the resource. It's the person who's making a livelihood out of it is going to keep on pumping money back so his livelihood continues. But they're wanting proof that that money is being used for conservation. If all the money was going into a conservation trust fund and they could audit the books of the conservation trust fund, they'd accept the fact that perhaps the income was enhancing the conservation of elephants. I'm a consultant, I work in a number of countries, and I've always been appalled when I've seen rural communities' income from wildlife being taken and put into a trust fund, and the communities don't see their income. The world thinks certain countries are magnificent because they're putting this money into conservation trust funds. What they're doing is taking away the income from those people that produced that money and returning very little of that money back whence it came. So that the answer is, don't disrupt the flow of income going back to people's livelihoods and protection of the resource.
The American people can be thankful that the Endangered Species Act was not enforced during the early 1900s. If it had been, the elk, wild turkey, the pronghorn antelope and the white-tailed deer would probably have been declared endangered. Today, these animal populations are extremely healthy, not because they were protected, but because they were and continue to be utilized. American hunters today provide the most financial support towards wilderness conservation, contributing over $1 billion a year. In years to come, Hwange National Park will suffer more droughts, and elephants will once again die of starvation. One thing is for certain: during one of these drought years, the ghosts of Tsavo will stop by.